So we're in the middle of this series, Ordinary Rhythms of Life on Life Discipleship. And we're doing a series called Ordinary really because I don't know about you, but so often when we talk about the spiritual life, we talk about something that's extraordinary, don't we? We talk about the mountaintop experience. We think of the supernatural when we think of the spiritual. And so the spiritual life becomes something that's exceptional. But I want to suggest actually that that's a wrong way of looking at it. That everything is spiritual, that we are called as the people of God to do life together, and it's ordinary and everyday, it's run-of-the-mill, it's mundane, and as we walk with God, we form habits and patterns and practices and disciplines that actually are very ordinary, very familiar, but they are nevertheless what the spiritual life looks like. And so far, Rachel opened a couple of weeks ago with the spiritual practice of eating together. That's one of my favorites. And she encouraged us to eat meals together whenever we meet. So that might be Sunday lunch. It might be for us. Part of it, I think, is enjoying some nibbles and a glass of wine after the evening service. I'd encourage you, if you're part of a midweek group, to just badger your leaders until you are eating meals every time you meet together as a midweek group, because it's where we forge and form relationships, isn't it, over a bowl of pasta, or some soup. So eat together as much as you can with one another. Last week, Miriam in the morning and Rachel in the evening looked at talking. And we were encouraged to share our Jesus stories. And, when we get together, what do we talk about? So Phil and I, when we get together, we talk about cycling and data and, power output and things like that. I might talk with Rob about the fact that Wales won yesterday, or Chelsea thrashed Newcastle yesterday. It was actually a good day for most of us today, wasn't it? With Arsenal winning, both Manchester's losing. So sport's an easy thing for us to talk about. Maybe for you it's work, or if you've got children or family, those sort of relationships, those sorts of things. Wouldn't it be amazing, actually, if when we got together, we talked about spiritual things? As the church of God, the people of God, when we gathered, we talked about spiritual matters. We had spiritual conversations. And I wonder whether we could ask ourselves these questions. What's God saying to you at the moment? This week, what's he been saying? Just as we have a cup of coffee or a glass of wine. And what are you doing about it? I wonder how that would enable us to grow in our faith together. This week, we're looking at listening. Simple as that. The other half of a conversation. And I think it's fair to say, isn't it, that listening is not easy. None of us find listening easy or natural. It's a skill that we learn. My little girl, Amelia, who's 5, sometimes I feel like she never listens to me. And, in fact, does the exact opposite of what I'm asking her to do. Sometimes I just think I'm not actually penetrating into her ear. And I realized actually that might well be true, because apparently at that developmental stage, you have kind of directional hearing, because you're so focused on the task that you're learning, you have to kind of phase out everything else. So actually, even though I think you're just ignoring me, actually, it's not working for her at that particular time. But hearing is not the same thing as listening. We'll look at that a bit more in a moment. But the truth is that our families train us, don't they, in the way that we listen. So my dad never really listened to me as I grew up. He just wasn't interested. He didn't think I had anything that was my own to say. And if I ever disagreed with him, he wouldn't tolerate that for a moment. And that meant that I learned a number of skills when it comes to conversation. And listening. So I learned to interrupt, because otherwise I would never have said a word. I'd have just waited and waited. I learned to anticipate as well. Perhaps you do that. So you think, I've heard my dad talk about this 453 times before. I know where he's going. I know what he's going to say. And at this moment, he's going to pause for breath, and then I'm in. So you're gathering your thoughts mentally, aren't you? In your mind. You're not really paying any attention to what they're saying, because you know what they're saying. And then the pause happens, and you're in. That's what I learned to do with my dad. And so when Joanne first kind of met my family, she was absolutely baffled by the way we communicated around the dinner table, because it was all quick fire. Nobody finished a sentence. Everybody interrupted all the time. Everyone interjected. Everybody anticipated. And she just sat there, mouth open, appalled by our conversation. But I think it's not just my family. It's not just me that needs to be a better listener. I think all of us want to be and need to be better listeners, don't we? Well, how can we become better listeners? Well, I think James chapter 1 helps us, and I'd love you to open it up and have a look at it, if you would, with me. There's some Bibles over there. Oh, and in the corner over here. The words, I think, might come up on the screen. If you brought your own Bible, that's the best, I think, although I can tolerate phones at this moment if you want to get them out. So we're in James chapter 1, verse 19. Dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. Because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Therefore, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you, which can save you. Do not merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. Anyone who listens to the word but does not do what it says is like someone who looks at his face in the mirror and after looking at himself goes away and immediately forgets what he looks like. But whoever looks intently into the perfect law that gives freedom and continues in it, not forgetting what they have heard, but doing it, they will be blessed in what they do. Those who consider themselves religious and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless. Religion that our Father accepts as pure and faultless is this: to look after orphans and widows in their distress and to keep oneself from being polluted by the world. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Let me just pray for us as we look at this passage together. Father, thank you so much for your word. Thank you speak to us. Help us to listen better, to be better listeners. Come, Holy Spirit, we ask. Open our ears to hear what you have to say to us tonight. In Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so the first thing we're going to talk about, funnily enough, is what it means to listen. And James says, verse 19, everyone should be quick to listen. For James, learning to listen really matters. So everyone needs to do it. Everyone needs to take it seriously. It's an urgent matter. It's not an optional extra. And remember, I said earlier on, listening is more than hearing. Bill Clinton, the president of the United States in the 1990s, when he was campaigning, was famous for what were described as his big ears, because he was a brilliant campaigner. So he could have a room of hundreds of people, and he would glad hand the room, networking, talking to people. But when he spoke to somebody, each person would describe a very similar experience, which was, it was as if I was the only one in the room. No one else seemed to matter. He was listening to what I had to say. It was amazing. Bill Clinton's big ears. And I think he's got something to teach us in how to listen. Because within that, there was intention, wasn't there? He was very deliberate in what he was doing. It was an act of will, his choice to listen. There was also, though, I think, his disposition. He was a curious man. He was interested in other people. So it was an act of desire. He wanted to listen and to learn. He enjoyed that moment of discovery. He had a genuine interest in those around him. I remember reading a book called Contemplative Pastor by Eugene Peterson. And there he talks about a spiritual gift that's really helpful for pastors called the gift of small talk. And he said it's that ability to be interested in absolutely anything, no matter how esoteric, strange, odd, or unique it might be. You can see how helpful that might be. It's a disposition. Thirdly, there's a presence there, isn't there? Each of them talks as if Bill was kind of there with them and no one else. He was fully present. He wasn't distracted in any way. So we've got to set aside our distractions, our phones, or, if you're meeting over a desk or a laptop, put away your emails. If you're have as you're going and you kind of got one eye on the person you're talking to, put your work down. And then if you're in a group, have you ever had this experience happen to you where you're talking to somebody? This is a real temptation for all vicars and church leaders, and you just got one eye going around their head just in case somebody comes into view behind the person you're talking to and they're more interesting than the person you're talking to. Have you ever noticed that? It's like, hang on, has my vicar got a wandering eye? Just kind of going around my head. And it's like, actually, no, they're just trying to see if they can, excuse me a second. Don't do that. Don't be distracted by what's going on around you. Give them your full attention. Be fully present. So what we're talking about here is active listening, where we take responsibility, where we make it easy for someone to talk to you, to talk to us, where we create the conditions so that they feel heard, so they feel listened to. And think about that moment. I'm sure each of us can remember a moment where we felt like somebody really listened to what we had to say, and it really mattered, and it felt incredible. But I expect most of us have also had a moment where somebody has just not listened to us at all, and that's felt frustrating, disempowering. We felt rejected. So what are some practical tips that perhaps we can think about tonight to help us to listen a little bit better? One of them is body language. Some really simple things. Eye contact. It's very helpful to actually look at people when you're talking to them, rather than looking away. A kind of open posture where you're leaning in, actually being interested in what they're saying, looking like you're interested in what they're saying. And then, of course, there are those verbal cues, where you expressions of interest and understanding. It might just be an or a oh and a yes and a ah, those sorts of sounds. But you might also want to summarize and repeat back to them what they've said to make sure that you've got it and that they know that you've got it. It might be that you need to ask a question or clarify something. One thing that I think is really helpful is you might be able to say, okay, so you've said to me 3 things. You've said this, this, and this. Is that right? It is, okay. Which one of those for you is the thing that matters most to you? Just really helps draw them out. Feel like you've been listening, you're attentive, you're interested. So be quick, says James, to listen. Then he says, be slow to speak. Don't interrupt. Pause. Wait. Be patient. Show some restraint. Make sure the person's finished their sentence. And don't jump in because they might have another sentence to come. Show respect too. Don't anticipate. Don't presume that you know what they're going to say. Allow them to surprise you with something fresh, a new revelation that you didn't know. Avoid solutions if at all possible. And this is to you guys out there in particular, okay? Most of the time, if a woman is speaking to you and they love you and you love them, they're not interested in a solution, okay? Yeah, there we go. It took me 5 years to figure that one out, okay? I can remember where I was I was sat in the small corridor between our toilet and our bathroom talking to my wife, and she just said it in a way, possibly in almost complete despair, that made me understand that I just needed to listen and not try and fix it. And I don't think I've ever had such a response to a point I've ever made in any talk. That's brilliant. Come on. And lastly, don't try and win the argument. Don't score points. Be slow to speak. And then, says James, be slow to get angry. Why is all this stuff about listening so important to James? Why does he keep coming back to it time and again in this letter? Well, I think it's because a failure to listen kind of sets up a cycle of anger and violence in our lives. Let me unpack that for you. I think a person who is not being listened to gets angry. I'm sure you've had that experience yourself. You feel like you're not being taken seriously. I remember being on a car journey. This happened most holidays, but one in particular, we were just coming out of Wales on the motorway, and I wanted to say something to my dad, and he was like, "Don't talk to me, I don't want to listen. I'm driving the car. Do you want me to crash the car?" And we had that all the time. And I just needed to talk to him, needed to tell him something, but he wouldn't let me. And I remember getting so cross, this fury that was pent up within me, that I hit the side of the car door really hard because I just needed him to listen, and he refused to do it. And we found actually that Amelia, my 5-year-old, is quite similar to that. That she has a deep sense of justice and right and wrong. And if we step into a situation and think she's done something wrong, but she doesn't think she has, but we don't let her explain her point of view because we're cross with her, she just turns into this great raging ball of fury because it's just not fair. And all we need to do is listen to her. And then both of us can move forward from that point. So it's easy for a person who isn't listened to get angry, but it's also easy for the person who's not listening to get angry too. Because the person who doesn't listen misunderstands what they've heard. They get it wrong, and they're often offended. They often think the worst, don't they? Don't we? All of us do that. It means we can become quite defensive and react to what we think we've heard rather than respond to what actually we should have heard. And so from both ends, things are said in the heat of the moment that we wish we hadn't ever said. But if we are quick to listen, slow to speak, then we will be slow to get angry. So for James, and I think for us, it matters, but it's not easy. So how can we become better listeners? There's something more here, I think, than a few practical tips about how to be active listeners. Well, I want to suggest this evening that it all starts with the gospel. Let's look at the second part, practice, verses 22 to 26. Actually, before we get to 22, I just want to look at verse 21. James says here, therefore get rid of all moral filth and the evil that's so prevalent, and humbly accept the word planted in you. Now that word that he's talking about there, it's the gospel. You can see it in verse 18. He chose to give us birth through the word of truth, that we might be a kind of first fruits to all he created. This word of truth, it gives us birth, new birth. We're born again from this word. It is the gospel. It means that we're the first fruits of the new creation as God recreates the cosmos. And so there is some truth to accept in this word. The truth is that we are more sinful than we give ourselves credit for. But we're more loved than we could ever imagine. The truth is that in Jesus, God has done for us what we could never do for ourselves. We can never earn his mercy or his forgiveness. We can never make ourselves right with him. But Jesus has done for us what needed to be done to make things right. So it means we can trust Jesus to make things right with us and God because of his offering of himself, his sacrifice on the cross, to bear our sins, to absorb in himself the judgment of God so that we can not be condemned. And we can trust Jesus to give us spiritual life because with him we can enjoy the fruits of his resurrection. As the Spirit comes to live in us, writes his law in our hearts and gives us hearts of flesh rather than hearts of stone, gives us spiritual life when we were spiritually dead. Those are truths to accept. But what on earth have any of those things got to do with listening? Well, if we're to accept those truths, we have to accept them with humility, don't we? And humility is the first quality of a good listener. Because if we accept the truths of the gospel, what we are doing is implicitly accepting our own brokenness and selfishness and sin. We're saying actually, as human beings, we are fundamentally broken at every level. And what that means is that we don't know what we think we know. One of my favorite theologians is a guy called John Calvin, who gets a bit of a bad press these days. If you're a Calvinist, it's usually an insult in the theological world. And one of the reasons for that, I think, is he or his followers coined a phrase for a particular doctrine he believed in called total depravity. It's not really going to win you many friends, is it, with a doctrine like that? Most people think total depravity means that Calvin thought that human beings were completely and utterly evil in every way. When he didn't believe that, because who would believe that? Because no one wants to believe that. And he didn't. Instead, what it was is he was contrasting with the other great medieval theologian of his day, Thomas Aquinas, who said human beings are infected by sin in every way apart from their minds. He said our reasoning, our moral reasoning, is not fallen. We can think our way to God. And Calvin said, that's nonsense. Our minds have been affected by the fall as much as the rest of us. Our thinking needs to be redeemed as much as our hearts need to be redeemed. And I think he was right. And of course, that should then give us pause for thought. Because it means we don't have all the answers. We can't make everything right. We don't know best. We can't be sure we know what we're talking about. And so we need humility. We need to listen. So accept the word. Secondly, says verse 22, don't merely listen to the word and so deceive yourselves. Do what it says. So listening should always provoke a response. It leads to action. That's exactly the same point that Jesus makes in the parable of the wise and foolish builders, doesn't it? And it shouldn't surprise us. James was the brother of Jesus. He's really reliant on a lot of Jesus' teaching in this letter. And here, this is perhaps where it's seen most clearly. Jesus, at the end of the Sermon on the Mount, tells this story of the two builders. One builds his house on the sand, the foolish builder. The other wise man builds his house on the rock. The weather turns nasty. The house built on the sand falls flat. The house built on the rock stands firm. And then Jesus makes the point, what's the difference between these two guys? He says, if you listen to my word, and that's all you do, you're like the foolish builder. But if you listen to my word and put it into practice, you're like the wise builder. So both of those builders, he's saying, the wise and the foolish, they both listen, but only one of them puts the words of Jesus into practice. Which one are you? So there is a response to the gospel, to those truths that we have received. So we can receive God's grace. We can enjoy his forgiveness and his mercy. We can celebrate this new spiritual and experience this spiritual life that we've been given. But, says James, get rid of all moral filth and the evil that is so prevalent. Strip it off. Rid yourselves of it. It's such strong language, isn't it? You think about it, it's only crazy nutters that you hear on the TV who talk about moral filth, isn't it? But actually, as far as James is concerned, that's how we should see the sin in our lives. It should be repugnant to us. It should be filthy. We need to treat it that way. And so for James, he believed passionately that the gospel will change your life. It will make a difference to how you live. It will transform you. Because obedience will come from listening. So you can ask that question, what is God saying to you? But immediately you have to follow that up with a second question, and what are you going to do about it? The second always follows the first. So that means if you're not living an obedient life, you should be concerned. James says it's like you've looked in the mirror, but then you've immediately forgotten what you look like. You've forgotten the truths of the gospel. You've forgotten the impact they make in your life. You've forgotten who you are and why you're here. And he says, actually, if you're not living a life of obedience, you're missing out. Because obedience isn't easy, but it's sure worth it. So look at verse 25. He says, if you live this life of obedience, you will know freedom and you will know blessing. It's hard, but it's worth it. But you know, that's not where James finishes. He just gets a little bit more specific. And we can see it actually there in verse 25. Where he says, whoever looks intently into the perfect law and continues in it, not forgetting what they've heard, but doing it, they will be blessed. You notice there's a shift of language. He was talking about receiving the word and doing the word. And now he's talking about keeping the law. And I don't know about you, but for me, there's something there about the word has a sense of understanding and trust and belief and truth. And law is more about command and action and obedience. And so he's emphasizing obedience here. He's saying, yeah, look intently into the law, investigate it, excavate it, dig deeper, work at it, exactly what we're doing in School of Theology at the moment. But do it. Put it into practice. It's more than Bible trivia. It's more than head knowledge. You need to practice what you preach. And then you need to continue in it. So you can't say, do you know, I listened brilliantly on November the 4th, 2015. I just prepared myself for it. I was in the zone. I haven't really listened since then, but I did it then. He's saying continue in it. It's not just a one-off. It's not occasional. It is a way of life. These things, these practices become habits. They become second nature to us. We should be living a lifestyle of listening. I am in the middle of a training program at the moment. Phil and I have got a couple of rides planned in the summer that are quite long, about 180 kilometers. He's younger and fitter than I am, so I've got to work harder to keep up with him. And so I've been doing this 9-day training program called the Tour of Sufferlandria. It's organized by a company called Sufferfest. Yes, so I've done day 8. Day 9 is today, it's the last day. So when I get home from here, I've got 2 hours on my bike doing interval training where I'm sprinting for 5, 10, and 15 seconds, having short rests in between, basically killing myself until I can go no more. All to get fit. But the point of it is that the more you do it, you have that consistency, that rhythm, actually it impacts you in the long term. It's not just a one-off. It's not just occasional. Continue in it, says James. And you see, James has this very specific response in mind here. Verse 26. Keep a tight rein on your tongue. He's saying to these guys and to us, tame your tongue. It was clearly a problem that the churches that he was writing to had. because it's a theme that he keeps coming back to throughout the letter. And he tells us what taming the tongue actually looks like. Look, flick over with me. Chapter 3, verse 10. Out of the same mouth comes praise and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this should not be. I remember when I was in the sixth form, a friend of mine who had just become a Christian had a really foul mouth, swore a lot. And I said to her, I was being mentored by a disciple by a guy, and he was taking me through James. It really struck me. She stopped swearing like that immediately. That was it, because she thought, actually, I need to listen to what James is saying here. But that's not all he says. Look at verse 11 of chapter 4. Brothers and sisters, do not slander one another. Anyone who speaks against a brother or sister or judges them speaks against the law and judges it. Let's not speak against each other. Let's not slander one another. Let's not say mean things about each other or think the worst of one another behind each other's backs. I think I've told you this story before, but it's had such a profound impact on me, I think it's worth telling again. My old boss, Rick Thorpe, when he led a church plant from HTB into the East End of London, the local clergy felt quite threatened by that. They didn't know what it meant. They didn't know how it impacted their own churches. And there was quite a bit of grumbling and frustration, both with Rick and with the bishop. Relationships were strained. And we used to go away as groups of clergy in Tower Hamlets every year. And one year, the area dean very wisely gave Rick a moment just to say, well, what's it been like ministering in this atmosphere of hostility and backbiting? And Rick just shared a little bit, and he said, early on, I made the decision that I would not speak about any of you behind your backs. I would not be negative about you. I would not speak badly of you. And you could see the room, the conviction in the room, because you knew that actually almost all of his colleagues that were there with him that day had spoken badly of him behind his back. And it changed the atmosphere of the deanery, of all those church leaders. It was transformative for all our relationships, because he refused to slander, because he had tamed his tongue. And the last thing James says, just briefly, in verse 16 of chapter 4, he says, all such boasting is evil. That's the other way we need to tame our tongues. We need to stop boasting about ourselves. You see, for James, the tongue is key to our spiritual lives. You can see it in the first 8 verses of chapter 3. He describes the tongue as a rudder of a boat. The boat's massive, the rudder's tiny, but it steers the ship. And so our tongues, they direct our lives, they form our lives. He goes on to say the tongue's a fire, it's a world of evil, it's restless, it's full of poison, and no one can tame it in their own strength. And that means we must start with the gospel. Because it's only with the gospel that we find the humility we need to be good listeners, to tame our tongues. So, just to conclude, just to wrap up, James says, listen, be quick to listen, slow to speak, then you will be slow to anger. But how can we become better listeners? It's not just practicing techniques. It starts with accepting the word, the gospel. That is where it begins. And then we need to do what it says, to live a lifestyle of obedience. And in particular, we need to keep the law. We need to get specific and tame our tongues. If we do that, we'll know incredible freedom, amazing blessing. We will live the life together that actually we all want. Let's stand, shall we?